Welcome back to the second in this series of videos looking at early hominins and human ancestors. In the last video, we looked at the first three, so Australopithecus afarensis, Australopithecus africanus, and Paranthropus robustus. In this video, we're going to be looking at the early Homo species that were Homo habilis, erectus, neanderthalensis, and then finally Homo sapiens, that's modern humans. So if we look at this family tree again, we looked at this at the start of the first video. We started off down here with Australopithecus afarensis, and we can see that the tree diverged and we had the speciation point here, and we met Australopithecus africanus and Paranthropus robustus over here. We're now going to be moving further up the geologic timeline. We're going to be shifting over here and we're going to be studying these four. Okay, so first we're going to be looking at Homo habilis. Again, we're still in Africa. That's important to note. So this was the early Homo species that existed somewhere in the region of 2.4 to 1.6 million years ago. So still significantly a long time ago. Now, this early Homo species, habilis, was morphologically similar to the Australopithecines. However, their brain size was considerably bigger and thus the shape of their skull was notably different. If we have a look at this picture here, we can see that the cranial capacity is becoming more dome-like. If we remember back to Paranthropus and the Australopithecines, their cranial capacity was much smaller, and we're starting to see the emergence of a forehead coming in here. If we look at the volume, the brain size was estimated to be roughly in the region of 600 cc. Now they were still quite small, just like the Australopithecines. However, some notable shifts started happening. The fingers were becoming less curved and the thumb was becoming more opposable with the fingers, and we had a more modern foot. So that's to say, it had the transverse and longitudinal arches. Other notable shifts in Homo habilis were that the jaw was becoming more parabolic rather than U-shaped. It was less robust, and we started to see smaller, narrow molar teeth. So suggests that something is changing with the diet. We start to see a culture happening. And when we talk about culture, we're talking about tool culture. And the tool culture associated with Homo habilis was Oldowan. And that is simply an association with very basic rudimentary pebble tools. And we'll talk more about them later in another video. Now, if we look at the skull of Homo habilis, we can see that although there was a smaller and a large variant, we're starting to get into the territory where it's more familiar to what we would expect in a human skull. We've got this rounded cranium and there's no sagittal crest, so that suggests that the jaw wasn't as massive. If we think about Paranthropus robustus, they had that very prominent sagittal crest and the massive jaw structure to go with it. The brow ridge is becoming decreased. There's less emphasis on that. The face was smaller than the other Australopithecine species, and crucially, the prognathism or the protrusion of the jaw is becoming less. Now, as this becomes less, it's important to note that the brain case or the cranium gets larger. Other interesting facts about the Homo habilis is that there is a bulge in this area of the brain known as Broca's area for the recognition and the development of rudimentary speech. Okay, the next Homo species that we're going to be looking at is Homo erectus, or upright man. Now, you'll notice with Homo erectus that the geographic distribution is much, much wider. So we're looking in Asia, Europe, in the eastern parts of Europe, and more widely dispersed over Africa. So Homo erectus was around between 1.8 million years ago to 300,000 years ago. So we're getting closer in terms of geologic time. They were thought to be the first hominins to venture out of Africa. And they had quite thick skulls. So they were quite robust type hominins, and they had larger brain volumes. And you can see in this mock-up here, we're starting to get more of that forehead coming through here, which is suggesting larger brain. In terms of culture, Homo erectus was a simple hunter-gatherer, and they did use stone tools as well. So the idea that they used tools and fire really does suggest more about how they interacted with their environment and their manipulation of it. Now, their selective pressures obviously improved their bipedalism, and we know that they were bipedal because they were able to walk across a really large landmass and move out of the continent of Africa. So when we're talking about these selective agents, we know now that these hominins were more bipedal, and as I've mentioned in previous videos, they have become more intelligent. Because they become more intelligent, they're able to manipulate tools and fire. Therefore, they can now manipulate their environment to work for them, hence why they were able to move to other areas, moving up towards the northern hemisphere where the climate wouldn't be as favorable to them. So if we look at Homo erectus here, we can see that we're starting to get that more human as we know it shape to the face. There's no diastema in the teeth. We're starting to have smaller teeth with that parabolic shape. However, it is quite a large jawed hominin, hence why we have the larger zygomatic arches here and the brow ridge. What we do find with the Homo erectus, is that they were taller than Homo habilis. So we're talking in the region of 1.3 to 1.6 meters, and their brain is considerably larger, so about 300 cc larger than habilis. The tool culture that we associate with Homo erectus is Acheulean. Now, we'll talk about tools in a later video, but just drawing that to your attention, Homo erectus was able to control fire, manipulate it to its needs, and used simple stone tools that were categorized as Acheulean. Here, if we look at the skull of erectus, we can see that this brain casing is getting larger again. Now, it was quite a robust, strong early human, hence why, as I've mentioned, the brow ridge, the zygomatic arches to cope with this large jaw. However, they did have reduced prognathism, which was counterbalanced by this extended cranial capacity across here. Underneath, we can see that there are these attachment sites for strong neck muscles, and this prevented the head from sagging forward. Because they had this large jaw, we needed something to counterbalance that. Now, interestingly, about the brain, the actual brain itself in Homo erectus, not only did they have a speech center, but they also had an area for the recognition of speech in others. This is called Wernicke's area. So Wernicke's area allowed them to try and decipher and decode what other Homo erectus species were trying to say, and the Broca's area allowed them to develop some sort of rudimentary communication system. Now, both these things suggest a higher level of intelligence than habilis. Okay, now moving on to Homo neanderthalensis, we can see here quite notably the geographical shift. We've moved out of Africa now, and we're starting to enter Northern Europe. Okay, so we're not in Asia, not in Africa, we are moving towards Europe, and specifically Northern Europe. So Homo neanderthalensis lived anywhere between 230,000 years ago to 30,000 years ago, so our nearest common ancestor. The Neanderthals were quite strong, thick-bodied, heavy-boned people, so they had quite a lot of musculature. They were short and squat in stature, and this allowed them to cope with the environmental pressures brought on by living in Northern Europe. There is research to suggest that we may have evolved with Neanderthals, and there may have been a divergence about 600 years ago, but that is still inconclusive at this point. For this reason, the next hominin species we're going to look at is Homo neanderthalensis. Now you can see from this map here that we have moved out of Africa, and we're starting to have a larger population in Northern Europe. Okay, so specifically in this region, although there are others in Eastern Europe and perhaps slightly towards Asia, but definitely nothing in Africa. So the Neanderthals were expected to have existed between 230 to 30,000 years ago. Because of their environmental location, they were thought to be quite short and squat people. This was to help with cold adaptation. They were quite thick-boned and therefore had a lot of heavy musculature. There is some research to suggest that Neanderthals are a separate species from humans, and that we diverged somewhere in the region of 600,000 years ago. Now, for this reason, Homo neanderthalensis is classed as a separate species to Homo sapiens, although that evidence is only suggestive and not conclusive. Okay, so if we look at the skull of Homo neanderthalensis, we can see it's looking very human-like as we would know it today. But on further study, we can see that we have quite a prominent brow ridge here, and the jaw structure is quite large and robust, and those zygomatic arches on either side tell us that there was some quite heavy muscle attachments. Now, if we look at the brain size of Neanderthals, they were very large actually, and in some instances larger than the range of modern Homo sapiens. However, cautionary note there, it doesn't suggest that they were more intelligent than us, as some evidence has shown that their brains were arranged in a different format. They were taller than previous Homo erectus and Homo habilis. However, they were not as tall as Homo sapiens. Their physique, like I said before, was heavily muscled with thick bones. They had the modern hand and feet, so that is to say the feet had the transverse and longitudinal arches. They were fully bipedal. Their hips and the alignment of their femurs were as we would expect with a walking gait. And crucially, they had shorter fingers and a longer thumb for opposability. This allowed them to carry out precision tasks and also still retain that prehensile grip. Things to look at when we're looking at the skulls. It had Homo neanderthalensis had a very heavy brow ridge. And you can see in this mock-up artist impression of a Neanderthal, it's almost covering the eyes, depending on the angle you're looking at. And they were quite prognathic, so they had this quite protruding mouth. Okay, so again, if we look at the picture of Homo neanderthalensis, we're looking at the side profile this time. I just want to point out a few important points that really distinguish Neanderthals from sapiens. The most obvious thing, apart from the brow ridge and the receding forehead, is this long cranium. And if you can see here in this cartoon, it's quite a long cranium here compared to the larger dome shape of the Homo sapien. However, what Neanderthal has that we do not have is this occipital bun-like swelling. So we tend to refer to this as an occipital bun, and this is a giveaway that it's Neanderthal and not Homo sapien or Homo erectus. What also differs Neanderthal from us, again, is the difference in the shape of the zygomatic arch and the heaviness of that jawbone. Although the teeth are smaller than what we would see in Homo erectus, they are certainly bigger than ours. Okay, other points of interest about the Neanderthal that has led scientists to argue that they were a different species is their rib cage. Now, with a modern human rib cage, as in Homo sapiens, ours tends to be wider at the top and not as cone-shaped and flared as you can see in the Neanderthal. So if I change this image, you can see here that the rib cage is considerably narrower up top, which is the converse of what we have. And it tends to flare out. Okay, so that is something that's very, very different in Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. If we look at the femur here of a Neanderthal compared to the femur of a Homo sapien, again, you can see it's shorter and considerably thicker. Okay, finally, we're getting to Homo sapiens. We can see that, again, the geographical distribution has changed more into Northern Europe, starting to get into Southern Europe here, in the Mediterranean region, and interestingly, we're starting to move into Australia. So the first anatomically modern humans started to appear about 160,000 years ago. So we're looking at the Middle East, we're looking in Africa and other places. Now, there was an earlier species of human, Homo sapiens as we know them, and they were described as the Cro-Magnon people. Now, Cro-Magnon people were early Homo sapiens, and we will discuss them in a later video. But they were notable to mention because of the tool culture that they possessed. So they started to manipulate tools in a more sophisticated way, which allowed them to exploit different landscapes. Now, Homo sapiens, unlike earlier Homo species, were very highly skilled hunters. We also carried out other ritualistic activity, as did Neanderthal. Again, we'll come back to that later, but the idea that we became more sophisticated, we were able to manipulate our surroundings, really does suggest a lot about intelligence, cranial capacity, size of the brain. So if we look here at an early Homo sapiens skull, this would be from a Cro-Magnon person, we can see that we have that typical dome shape and high forehead that we expect to see in humans. The slight brow ridge you can see there, but not much, and the eye sockets seem to be fuller here. We had a large brain capacity with a very highly developed frontal lobe, hence the forehead position being prominent and important to mention. Our height is bigger, taller, and our skeletal structure has been better adapted for our environments. Now, we can see that we have more of a developed chin. You can't see this fella here because he's got a beard, but in the next picture you will. And although we originally came from Africa and Asia, we then went on to inhabit the entire world. So if we look at this older Homo sapiens, this would be a Cro-Magnon person, and down here for reference is a modern modern skull of a Homo sapien. You can see that it has this slight point at the back of the skull here, which you can also see here. What we can see that is very similar is the reduced tooth size compared to Neanderthal. There is no brow ridge, although there may be a slight swelling. The face is becoming more vertical, so there's no prognathism happening, and there's more nasal bridge definition. We have this high vertical forehead, and we have this wide dome-shaped skull. Okay, so that's all the hominins that we need to cover. I just want to take you through the two overall trends. So as we move along through geologic time, from about 3.9 million years up to present day, we can see that there has been a massive increase in cranial capacity and hence brain capacity. And from that, you should be able to infer a lot of things about intelligence, way of life, and so on. Now, to manage and to balance out us for bipedalism, our cranial capacity has increased and our level of prognathism has decreased. So because we need our skull to balance on top of our head, our face has become flatter and our skull has become more dome-shaped at the back. This is a comparison table from the Nelson textbook. Please take the time to look at these points of differences. In your exam, you can use these exact points as differences to dot point a compare and contrast answer. Okay, just a couple of questions before we finish off. We have three jawbones here, X, Y, and Z. I'd like you to think about which one belongs to which type of primate. So which one would be a human, which one would be an ape such as a gorilla or a chimp, and which one would belong to an early hominin such as Australopithecus afarensis. Okay, hopefully you've worked out that this one here is the primate, so a chimp. This would be Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, and this, of course, is Homo sapien. Now, the things that give this away, hopefully you spotted that the jaw is going from U-shaped to more parabolic as we go through. the diastema here is starting to be reduced, and the overall size of the teeth are getting smaller. Okay, last thing here to look at. Again, you have three primate skulls. One is a chimp, one is Australopithecus afarensis, and one is Australopithecus africanus. See if you can label those skulls and provide reasons for your answers. Okay, so hopefully you were able to work out that this is a chimp skull. The giveaway here is the large canine and the diastema, so that's the gap. This one here is Australopithecus afarensis, and this is Australopithecus africanus. Now the reason for that is if we look at the size of the skull, we're going from small to large, so this must be an earlier primate than, an earlier hominin than this one.